Evening, everybody, and welcome to the Rare Book Room. My name is Irene, and I help direct events here at the Strand. For a little bit of history, Strand was founded in 1927 by Benjamin Bass over on 4th Avenue's Book Row. Stretching from Union Square to Astor Place, Book Row gradually dwindled from 48 bookstores until, after 93 years, the Strand is the sole survivor, now run by third-generation owner Nancy Bass Wyden. Under Nancy, the Strand is not only surviving in an increasingly competitive and unsure environment, but it is thriving. The Strand continues to famously hold 18 miles of used, new, and rare books, and now hosts nearly 400 events a year. In large part, this is thanks to all of you. Without our loyal community of book lovers, we wouldn't be here today. Tonight, I am excited to welcome Owen Colfer and his new fiction novel, Highfire. Owen is a New York Times bestselling author of the Artemis Fowl series, as well as 2 adult crime novels, the Los Angeles Times Book Prize shortlisted Plugged and Screwed. Joining Owen tonight in discussion is Charles Soule. Charles is a New York-based novelist, comic book writer, musician, and attorney. While he worked for DC and other publishers, he's best known for writing Daredevil, She-Hulk, Death of Wolverine, and various Star Wars comics from Marvel Comics, and his creator-owned series, Curse Words, from Image Comics. There was additions. I should have checked this. Curse Words from Image Comics and Letter 44 from Oni Press. His novel, The Oracle Year and Anyone, will be available for sale at the registers after this event. I couldn't be more excited to welcome them both here to the Strand. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming Highfire to the Strand.
Hello.
Good evening.
It is a pleasure to be here. Thanks for so many people coming out. This is great. I don't even know what day it is. What day is it?
I'm still on European time.
Yeah.
I was gonna say English time, but that's not European time anymore. So.
Yeah, as of today, right?
Oh, yeah, as of today.
That is really something. I still kind of can't believe it a bit.
No, I think most people in England can't believe it either. I can't see it making much of a difference for a few years, but we'll see.
Yeah. It's funny how things that most people don't want to happen somehow happen anyway these days, huh?
That is true, America.
Anyway, let's shift away from that into this phenomenal book, which I was very happy and excited to get a copy of early, and I was thrilled to be asked to read it and talk to you tonight. This is a pleasure. And
I'd like us to talk about Daredevil. That's
well,
what I want to say.
We will get there. But I loved this book. I really did. Sometimes I'm sure you get sent a bunch of books and you can have a stack and you're like, well, whatever. And I jumped into this and I read it in a sitting, basically, and I thought it was great. And there's a lot of things I want to ask you about it. I want to talk to you about it, and I can just sort of get into that if you like. Is there anything you'd like to tell these folks about the book, or?
It's about a dragon. He drinks a lot. He likes Flashdance, and he lives in the bayou in Louisiana. So that's where we start. And
I thought the reason he likes Flashdance was because I noticed it early. So the thing you know about the dragon. I don't know how many of you have read the book already. It just came out. All right, a few. I've also read the book. As I said, really liked it.
Why don't we four talk among ourselves?
Yes. So the dragon in the book is not 50 feet long, not like a jetliner, right? He's sort of small as dragons go, and he can fit into human clothing. And one of the things he wears a lot is a Flashdance T-shirt. And it was confusing. It's just some random retro reference, and then you explain why he likes it, which was great. And I think you all have that to look forward to. There's a lot of great moments, but that bit in particular I really enjoyed. Why Flashdance of all things?
It doesn't really work when you explain it out loud. No. You have to be kind of in your imagineering, your brain palace. But Vern is explaining to his familiar squib why he likes Flashdance, and he says, if you watch Flashdance, and that scene where the girl is on the chair, the famous scene, and the water comes down, and if you pause the video at the right time, when the water hits her, it looks like she has wings and she looks a little bit like a dragon. And Squib says, you really must have to practice that pause. And he said, oh, yeah. So there was quite a lot of pausing that.
Yeah,
but,
he says, how long did that take you? And he said, well, decades.
Decades.
To get that moment right.
And
so
that is the least weird thing that happens in the whole book.
Yeah. There's, but it's just so great. I really, really did like it. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about it. So you're based in Ireland, in Dublin, which is a great town, but yet the book is set in New Orleans, which is a very specific and very American-specific location. It's specific even within America. It has its very own culture. I love New Orleans. I've visited many times. The music, there's a lot of things that are great about it. But why did you choose the Louisiana swamps in New Orleans, and how did you kind of nail it so well in terms of the detail work?
Well, thank you. The reason I chose it, there's a reason... because I was trying to find a legend that I could hitchhike on. And my theory, I try and stress test everything when I'm writing it. And the stress test I use for Artemis Fowl, for example, would be, if there were actually fairies, how would that be possible? Could it happen? Because kids are so in your face about things, and if you explain it to them, they're fine. If it's a valid explanation, but if you try and fob them off, they don't believe that. So I've had I'll tell you what kids are like. My son is 16, and I was bringing him to school for a parent-teacher meeting, and a kid came to my son. I'm standing directly behind, very visible, and the kid says, yeah, your dad, he wrote the Artemis Fowl books. And Sean was like, yeah, this dad, him, yeah, and he said, yeah, the first 3 were good, but number 4,
always.
Like, he actually made the plane crashing. And then, so I've learned to be ready with my explanations. And for Squib, I said, if there was Vern, if there was a dragon alive, if he's really going to be alive, how would he stay alive this long? And he would either have to go into the middle of the South American rainforest, or if he liked his creature comforts and maybe he liked watching cable TV, then he would have to go somewhere near humankind, but somewhere where if he was seen, no one would believe it. And this place is the Honey Island Swamp, because there is a legend, and this is true, and maybe some people know it here, of the Honey Island monster who is supposed to live on Honey Island on the Pearl River. And the legend is this, and do not blame me, you made up this legend. This is what people think. In 1940-something, a circus train crashed into the Pearl River, and this is true. A gorilla escaped. That is true. The gorilla
I know where this is going.
The gorilla then had relations with an alligator. That might not be true. And they had a little gorilla gator. Now, I don't know who is known as the Honey Island Monster, and people see him all the time. There are swamp tours. You can go and find him if you want. And there are books. Check it on YouTube. And I thought, if a dragon who looks a little bit like an alligator, gorilla gator, wants to hide out, that's the perfect place. Because if he is ever seen, and the guy goes running back into town and says, I saw this monster, people go, okay, sure you did. Honey Island Monster, well done. So no one would believe it. So I was searching the world on YouTube trying to find these legends, and the best one was the Honey Island Monster. So that's where I put Vern.
Well, that's great. I think that makes a lot of sense. But even then, like New Orleans, like I've spent a lot of time in New Orleans, and I've taken the airboats out in the swamp, and it all felt pretty right. Yeah. Did you go down there and check it out and spend time, or?
No, I didn't go.
Wow.
I would. I know. I feel a bit ashamed about that. I mean, I didn't get to go down there.
You should
in that time, but I will go down. But also, I feel you guys owed me one because you put Tom Cruise in that movie Far and Away about Ireland. and we were a bit scarred by that. So I said, well, I'm going to give him an Irish dragon in New Orleans, and so that is my revenge on your entire culture. But joking aside, I should have gone down there, but
it's still.
But
there
I did work
for the
hard on
moment.
it, so I think it's okay.
We'll
see. We'll see.
I'm not from Louisiana, but I've been to New Orleans many times,
Yeah.
and I didn't feel it was very off. It was good.
Good. Thank you.
But this actually leads into the next thing, which is about the world building in general, because you cherry picked a lot of dragon legends, either both from fiction and from, I guess they're all from fiction, right? But I'm there's a bit where the St. George and the Dragon, the famous story and the illustration, all of it is sort of explained within the book, and it felt like you had taken the way that humanity thinks about dragons, who have this kind of weirdly prominent place in our mythology and legends, for not actually having existed, and tried to make it all kind of make sense. And it felt to me like you had a huge file or set of notes about what you could do with all this mythology, particularly Vern's family and all of those things. And it felt like that's being stored up for maybe down the line. Is that right? Or, how did you approach the dragon mythology side of this?
Well, I did read a lot of dragon mythology. I've always kind of liked dragon mythology. They're very interesting and exotic mythological creatures, and there's so many famous stories. I love the fact that the St. George and the Dragon story there's like 30 versions. It most likely didn't happen in England at all. It didn't happen at all. Okay, it's a dragon. But it most likely came out of Libya, not England at all. So I find that very interesting. And a lot of the legends, if you look around, especially in Europe, they have like a different version of the same legends. So it's all like the Irish heroes and the English heroes, and then I think if you trace it back far enough, Scandinavia seems to be the first real seat of the mythological cycles.
Like Grendel and all that.
Oh yeah, all that
yeah.
stuff, and that's where the original mythological dwarves came from. So there's a lot of stuff going on, but I do like that Squib would reference this amazing and noble story and about the St. George dragon, and Vern would go, yeah, that asshole, he got what was coming to him. He was an idiot. He was going around like a fool fighting knights. So he kind of he's a way of puncturing Squib's bubble when they talk about these noble dragons.
What I like too is that Vern is 3,000 years old, and so that means he's physically, he's seen human history really from 1,000 years BCE to now. So that gives him a perspective on humans. And one of the things I particularly really thought was smart was the way that Vern considers himself an apex predator. He says it repeatedly, but then he talks about how humans are even sort of more terrifying in a way, because when they ran out of predators, they started preying on each other, and so they always could remain predators by just preying on other humans, which I thought was kind of scary and felt very very correct.
That is a scary thing, and it's a true thing that most creatures, when they don't have a predator, they often die out. But when humans stopped having predators, they just started to prey on each other, so that they would always be at the top of the food chain, and it's quite a sad thought as well, but true.
Yeah, I put the book aside at that moment. I just put it down and I shed a tear. Yeah, a little bit. But then I picked it back up because it was very good. It was very good. It was very entertaining. So I also wanted to add, because obviously Highfire is great, but you have written other things and had other things happen in your career. Artemis Fowl, and the film is coming out imminently. And I looked up, did a little bit of research, right? I try to do my part for these things. And it seems like that has had a truly tortured path to finally being out. And I have a few things of my own, thankfully, that are, going in that path too. But it always seems like it's 2 steps forward and 10 steps back. And so, I don't know if you want to speak about that a little bit, because it was back in 20 years ago is when this all started, right?
We sold the book or the movie rights on the strength of the manuscript to Disney Miramax 20 years ago. And I thought, in my naivete, well, what time is it now?
Sure.
I'm sure
Absolutely.
they'll be making it by 8:30, so that's fine. Me and my dad went around we thought, well, we'll just make a video, we'll send it in, and they're going to love it, and they'll use all those sites. And we were just so silly, and it never really happened. But I had one, I suppose the strongest instance of what you said about the 2 step forwards, 10 steps back was, we went to France to do kind of a storyboarding with the director who was at the time Jim Sheridan, who's great. And so we had written a script, and we brought 2 storyboard artists and a guy from the studio. And when we started the meeting, Jim said, okay, what we have to, I think, establish is what is in Violet that is not going to be changed. And the first thing is that it is set in Foul Manor, which is in Dublin, Ireland. Everybody went yes, except the movie guy, who said, okay, could it be in space? And we all looked at each other, and that's not even. I'm sure you have worse stories.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like it's how it goes.
And you just look at each other, and you know this weekend is a bust. Nothing's going to happen. And we left there worse off than we arrived. It was so.
Now it's with Kenneth Branagh, right? Who is like amazing.
Kenneth, I think it's great, and so in a way it was meant to be. But we'll see.
Who knows what might happen between now and May, right?
Yeah, he's great, and he looks at it through the like everything is like Shakespeare to him. So he's trying to find the big themes. Which is great.
I watched the trailer again today, and I was very impressed. You got a Radiohead song for it. I like that band. That was great. And it just, I think it looks really good, honestly. I mean, I'm excited to see it. One of the little factoids I saw about it when I was, again, doing my homework, right, as I do, is that it was supposed to come out last year, and then the Disney-Fox merger happened, and they put so many movies on the shelf that they didn't even release, but they're going to put yours out. So I guess you should feel good about that, because like 50 movies we're never going to put them out, and yours, they're still doing, which is good.
Yeah, I think the merger happened and they weren't ready, and there was a number of things, and they wanted to do some reshoots, so they were happy to take the delay. But my initial thought would have been, oh, this is terrible, it's been delayed, because you just think, when you hear delay, you think, oh, it's something is terrible here. And that, I don't think that was the case, but it's coming out on 29th of May, so
yeah, it's going to be good.
I told my son said, are we going to a premiere, Dad? And I said, well, have you read the books? Well, no, we haven't read the books, obviously. And I said, only people who have read the books are going to the premiere with me. And they said, what are the details about the premiere? They're not committing to reading the books.
Unless it's a nice
hotel. They want to know exactly, what hotel are we in, what clothes. So, yeah, they're a tough sell.
Yeah. Well, that brings me to the next thing I was going to talk about, is you could always just hand them the comics, right?
Yeah.
And I have a big background in comics. I've been doing them at kind of a lot of different characters for many years, and I find the process of writing novels obviously very, very different than writing comics and so on, and they both are very satisfying in different ways. And so I guess it's sort of a couple things I thought we could talk about is why did you want to take Artemis Fowl and do it as comics, and how did you find the process? Like, I mean, this is the process of it. To me, I would just, like, as somebody who does it, it'd be interesting to talk about.
I've always loved comics, and I wanted to be a comic book artist, but I never got that good, and I think it's
very hard.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing to know you're not that good, because a lot of people don't know they're not that good.
Oh yeah.
And you get bad comics, but so
what? No.
As soon as I went to Disney, I thought these are the guys. So when the first book came out, I started asking, "Can we have a graphic novel? Can we have a graphic novel?" So after book 3, they said okay, and I had already found a guy who would help me adapt them. His name is Andrew Donkin, who'd worked in comics for decades, and he's a mate of mine. So we adapted them together, and then we had an Italian artist, Giovanni Rigano, who was in a Disney stable in Milan, and he illustrated them. But the process was fantastic because, as you know, if you're writing a novel, you just stay in your own room for a year. But if you're doing a comic and you're collaborating, you get to go out and have like working lunches.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And one of our guys lives in Italy, so we have to go to Italy for no reason. And my wife saying, doesn't he have FaceTime? And I say, you don't understand the creative
The process. It's
I have to go to Italy in a boat, possibly in space. But so we have all these trips. Gio comes with his partner and stays with us, and we all go to London, and thank God for Ryanair. And I honestly, for me, it's like a holiday. And when those books come out, it is like such a bonus. And to have done it with two friends, it's just really amazing.
I have been lucky to work with just extraordinary artists over my career in comics, and a lot of them have become like, brothers of mine, almost brothers and sisters, whatever, like people that I'm incredibly close with. And it is like, I liken it to being in a band, right? Because you all have different responsibilities. There's the writer, the inker, the penciler, the colorist, the letterer, and you all have to hopefully perform at the top of your skill level to produce a good comic. Making a good comic is really challenging, as you well know, right? And it doesn't matter how good the story is, there's so many things that can go wrong during the process. So it's really about finding that the moment where everybody can gel and everybody's using their talent in a way that's complementary as opposed to fighting against each other. So I'm glad that it was fun and you're still enjoying it.
You have to remember, I think initially Gio came on, Gio's Italian. So, you know what, any Italian men here? Okay, so we all know what Italian men are like. They're quite racy, as we know. And one of the early scenes in the Artemis Fowl book was Holly Short, who's like the heroine. And all of a sudden there's a shower scene. And I'm thinking, this is a Disney comic book. And like Holly was clearly half naked in the shower. Well, she's probably fully naked, but we can only see half it. And we were trying to explain to this Italian man, no, you can't. This is a book for 9-year-olds. You cannot have a voluptuous fairy naked in a shower. And he said, yes, but I just put in more steam. And so he said, okay, let's try the more steam. And there's like a single wisp of steam. And that is... So eventually Andrew said, I'm going to have to go over there and show him.
I'm going to have to go to Italy.
I have to go to Italy.
On the boat.
And it was like the more steam mission he went over. Mm-hmm. More steam, just a little bit of steam. So if you ever read that book, you can see the steam. And it's there for a reason.
I work with a Spanish artist on a series, and he would do that too, often, very often. Just people would just be naked for no reason at all. Yeah. And so I guess it's not just it's the Latin blood, right?
The Latin blood.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they like naked people, which is great. Good for them. Why not? Why not? Nudity. So all right, phenomenal. So yeah, I mean, I love comics. I'm glad that you like.
I remember going to London. This is to get engaged because diamonds were cheaper. If you were even to fly to London and get the diamond. Unfortunately, that was also the weekend that Frank Miller's Dark Knight came out, which I couldn't get in Ireland, and I spent the whole weekend rereading The Dark Knight, and it was not a great way to spend your engagement weekend. Surprisingly, we're still married, but I just remember being lying on a bunk in the house we were staying in. I just could not believe what I was reading and the art I was seeing. And Jackie saying, well, what do you think of my ring? And I was like, the Joker is dead. Don't you understand?
Yeah, I like that one too. It's a hell of a read. But back to Highfire, right? So why, of all the things you could have chosen, why for an adult, adult fantasy novel, why dragons?
Well, it didn't start out as an adult fantasy novel. It actually went through stages. First of all, it was a kid's book, and it was not a dragon. It was just an old guy living in a kind of a secluded area and a kid. And that's quite a classic setup for a children's book. And then, the old grumpy guy doesn't want any kids, and then the kid is a bit naughty but also charming, and they gel. And I realized... after about 15,000 words, this is like, is it Goodnight Mr. Tom or one of those, and it's not as good as that. So why am I doing something that is very close to something else, and I'm never going to make it better than that? And it just struck me, if the guy was a dragon, that would have put a different maybe no one would know if I made the guy into a dragon. And that was okay for a while, but then one morning I got up and the dragon just began to swear, and he had a martini for breakfast, and I thought, my subconscious has figured out something here before I figured it out. Now, I know writers often kind of don't take responsibility for their characters. They say it just popped into my head. But I think it's your unconscious or your subconscious.
Absolutely.
Already knows the answer and just passes it down to you. So I was like, oh, it's a dragon and it's not a kid's book. And it just felt right. And sometimes things just feel right, and you know you've got it, you're on the right track. And so I went back and rewrote it and went looking for the Louisiana angle, and it all came together. So initially I wasn't starting out to write an adult fantasy novel about dragons, but I do think it's amusing when you have someone if you have a well-known icon not saying what you expect them to say. For example, Vern the dragon is on the ketogenic diet, and you just wouldn't expect that. But the master of that is Terry Pratchett. And Terry Pratchett, in my favorite Terry Pratchett book, which is Mort. If you haven't read it, it's a great entry level because it's quite thin. But the beautiful, when you get older, thin is really important. I just carry little books now, so if I was starting to read now, I'm afraid Lord of the Rings would not stand a chance because it's just too big. I don't want to die before I finish a book. So, anyway, the Grim Reaper is in Mort. He's the main character. And he wants to take on Mort, which means death, as his assistant. And for a long time, he doesn't say anything. He just kind of points. And you can see his skull-like features and his skeletal hand. And then halfway through chapter 2 or 3, he just turns to Mort, and you feel, oh my God, here it comes, he's going to speak. And in a voice of great import, he says, I could murder a curry. And you think, yes. You were not expecting death to want a curry. And it's perfect. And that's what I was trying to do with Vern, to make him surprising. So you don't expect a dragon to be small. You don't expect him to like Flashdance. You don't expect him to be on Netflix all the time. And so he's a different kind of dragon.
Yeah, I liked how you start with all the weird stuff, right? Like none of those things make sense at first. Then over the course of the book, you kind of understand why those choices are made, and it all clicks very nicely. It's really good.
All comes together, I hope.
There's another writer named Ben Aronovich, who does a very similar thing with kind of his whole Rivers of London series, the PC Grant stuff. I thought he's just great.
He's
same
very
kind
good.
of thing.
Yeah, he's
really,
very,
really
good.
sharp.
Yeah.
But I wanted to pick up on something you said a minute ago about the way that novels, your subconscious tends to work while you're writing a novel. Because writing a novel, I don't know how fast you are. I'm pretty fast, but I'm still usually working on a book for most of a year. Yeah. And what tends to happen is I have an idea of the book at the beginning, and then I work on it. And it's often in that last 10% of editing or figuring it out or messing around with what I already have that I realized the book was kind of there from the very beginning. I just didn't see it, or I couldn't. There's this moment of revelation when you're like, oh shit, this was what the book I was writing was all about. This was the reason. All of these things I set up early on, there's a reason I did it, and it's this twist. But if you had asked me at the beginning of the book, I couldn't have seen it. But somehow it was there all along, which is this weird magic of writing long-form fiction, which is exciting and great, and I really like. So, all right, so another thing I was going to ask you about is Mogwai. Because there's a character in the book who is a Mogwai, and when I think Mogwai, I don't think of the character that you put in this book. I think of, Gizmo. And I know there's mythology that comes from different places about Mogwai, but why did you, I'm just wondering why you chose that and why you did it that way. It was very interesting to me because you didn't have to do it that way. You could have called him something else, but you chose Mogwai.
That is very easy to answer. I had the creature and I was listening to Mogwai. There's a band called Mogwai. I don't know if anyone knows them. They're great. And a Mogwai is also a supernatural creature, and there's various descriptions of Mogwai. So I just said, well, that must be a sign. So I just call him a Mogwai. So that's one of those easy to answer questions that doesn't have a long.
It doesn't burn much time in the discussion, though.
Sorry.
Jeez. Well, that's great. That's good to know. I guess I like that band. They're good. So going back to something we were talking about earlier with all the world building and all the sort of the documents you probably have on your hard drive or notes, whatever you do, notebooks. it seems like this is a world that you have thought a lot about, and you could certainly do more with. Is that the hope if it does well? I mean, would you tell more stories with these characters? I liked them a lot. I hope so.
I'd love to tell more stories. I mean, I do have another book planned, and it's just seeing if there's an appetite for that, if people want it, and if they do, absolutely. I don't plan that far ahead. I know J.K. Rowling has famously written the last chapter of Harry Potter and hid it away for years, and she planned. How many Harry Potters was it? Seven. Well, yeah, that's seven Harry Potters. But I usually plan about one book ahead, and I'll see how I go. And most of my stuff comes while I'm writing, so I would have a very loose plan, maybe 2-3 pages of a plan. And it's like you say, your mind is working all the time on it, and it just throws up this stuff when it's needed, and the jigsaw fits together.
I'm working on a novel now, and I use this program called Scrivener. I don't know what you use to write, but Scrivener is like it's designed for generating your first draft, and so it has all these. You kind of build the manuscript from notes to outline to rough draft to whatever, and it's really very intuitive about how it does that. But there's a point where you can't just be sort of working at a 10,000 foot level. You have to actually dig in. You have to actually write the words. You have to write the book. And usually when I put my mind into that gear where I'm not just sort of thinking about a bunch of random thoughts and actually writing the book is when I generate sort of more ideas per minute than I do otherwise, because you sort of don't have a choice. Like when you actually have to write the dialogue and you have to write the descriptions of locations, you're forced to push yourself into the higher level of creativity, and then all the kind of the really good ideas start to pop. At least that's how I find it. It's exhausting, but it's also really it's kind of magical.
For me, the best time is when you're over the hump and you're on the home straight and you've got maybe 20,000 words to do, and you could literally do that in 2 days. If you're really going at it and you want to get to the end, and it's a great time. It's when you're in the zone. It doesn't happen very often for me, but when it happens, I have this orange keyring I put on the door, and no one comes near me.
That's a good idea. I might steal that.
The old orange keyring. So I'm either working really hard or having a nap. No one knows. Nobody knows.
It is funny how like a day can be a writing day can be a very, very different thing, right? There are days when I get up and I just go, and I'm good until it gets dark, and then I'm like, I stand up and I'm like, where did the day go? But I've got 10,000, 15,000 words, whatever, that I'm happy with. But then there's other days where maybe I'll start around 4:30, and I'll scribble around a little bit, and then just nothing happens, and it's very hard to kickstart for me. Like it either is or it isn't. Yeah. So
And guys like Stephen King who can just put out these massive, brilliant books every year. That's amazing. But I could not do that.
Do you know he's a mystery writer? I think his name is or was Simenon. Simenon.
George Simenon.
Yeah.
The French guy.
The French guy. So he would write these slim crime novels. You'd love them. They're slim, and. Yeah, exactly, right? And so they're mysteries, but the way he would apparently approach it is he would just be writing a book, just sitting around typing, and I believe he worked in the post office. And so he would get up early at like 4 a.m, and he would work for 2 hours, and then he would have his breakfast and he would go to work. And so every day he would spend those 2 hours working, and if he finished a novel, he would immediately set the manuscript aside and start, because he would write 3,000 words a day or something every day. So if the last 2,000 words were the end of novel A, he would write 1,000 words of novel B that day, which is, fuck that guy.
They're going to put that on the cover of his next book. Inspector Maygrave, fuck that guy. 5 stars. Love it.
But I guess, process is mysterious, right? Like everybody has their own approach to it. And, I wish it were a job that you could just do every day. It'd be a lot simpler, but sometimes it's just not there. No,
so like there's every book I write about 2/3 of the way through. I don't know how you are about this, but I have a crisis.
Oh yeah. And why did I do this? I'm no good. I'm no damn good.
Why did I think people would want to read about a dragon drinking vodka? Tom Cruise wasn't that bad. I should have done but that every book, and it's about 5 minutes, and so it's It's about a month of the crisis. So I just kind of wander around the house, and my biggest crisis was when I did the Hitchhiker's Guide sequel for Douglas Adams' estate, and I love Douglas Adams. He's my big hero, and I was making a decision. Who knows Hitchhiker's Guide? Who's read it? Okay,
well, yeah.
Good, everybody. So there's one of the most famous characters is Zaphod Beeblebrox, who has. I can get into nitty gritty if everyone's read. Who has two heads? Okay, so and I wanted to remove one of the heads. Oh my God. So and I knew that the fans would be annoyed, and this was even before the internet really took hold. So like there was no real toxic fandom, but there were like slightly miffed English fans who may just shake their heads in disapproval and leave Europe. So. I was a bit annoyed by this. Not annoyed, but I was worried about it because there had been a thing on Facebook. This was like in the infancy of Facebook. And in the infancy of Facebook, one side of the screen was given up to societies. So join the society to do this. And it was just sent out to everybody. And one day there was join the society to stop Owen Colfur writing. This is like, the Snyder Cutter. I was just terrible. And I was very depressed. So I joined that society. And people were really mean. And so I went into my wife and I was a bit upset. But like a true Irishman, I wouldn't say what was upsetting me. I just moped around, standing between her and whatever she was trying to do. And so eventually she said, "What?" And I said, "Well, honey, there's this fictional alien who's president of the galaxy, and I'm going to remove one of his heads. He's got two heads. Did I mention that? I'm going to remove his heads, and I think there'll be some guys in England who are possibly living with their parents who will be very upset by that." And Jackie looked at me and she said something, which is quite deep, and she said to me, "Well, I have to pick up the children." And you know what that means? It means get a real problem, for God's sake. So. But so that got me over the hump. But the point is, every single book, crisis, every single book, even if it's a little picture book, I think we all have those.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of the social media stuff, so I do a lot of work with Star Wars these days, like a lot, and which I love. It's one of my favorite fictional universes out there, and I do, I'm writing a book right now about Kylo Ren, Ben Solo, Kylo Ren, the whole thing, and the fans of that character are very focused about the things they want that character to do, and only those things, which is fine. I understand he's lovable, sort of. But whenever an issue comes out, it's a comic. I always hold my breath because I don't know what the choices I've made that are gonna light them up, either for good or ill. And so I look at, the issue comes out. I sort of don't want to look at Twitter that day, but you look at Twitter that day just because you do. And so far it's been good, but I know there's going to be a choice I make in this book that is going to turn them all against me, and the torches will come out, and it's, but it's part of the, when you're working on a character, whether it's Hitchhiker's Guide or Star Wars, whatever, that lots of people take to heart, they feel ownership of it, and you have to just sort of do your best and try to tell a story you believe in, and it's it's complicated, but it's kind of fun too. I even kind of like it when they get pissed off, to be honest. Like, it's kind of cool.
You do see how far you can push people, but I'd like to see actually what happens there. That would be great.
Well, the thing is, you have to take a little, you have to give a little, right? So there's a scene in the fourth issue of it where Kylo Ren, it's right when Ben Solo is becoming Kylo Ren in the story, and so it's right when that's happening, and he takes his shirt off, because that is something that, I don't know if you remember in Last Jedi, people were very excited about that scene. He's like walking around with not a shirt on. So I decided if nothing else,
can I suggest a little steam?
There's actually a little blood, which I think might be even more dramatic. But yeah, we'll see. Lucasfilm might say this is too much. Yeah. Bring on the steam. Bring on the steam. It's all Disney, right? Steam be with you. Yeah, exactly. So, how are we doing on time? 2 minutes. What should we do for 2 minutes?
Well, I'd like to hear more about Star Wars. I'm having the best time. This is great. So
okay, Star Wars. Let's see. What else can I tell you about Star Wars? Here's a fun one, right? So the other big thing I'm writing for Star Wars now is this. It's the Star Wars flagship for Marvel Comics, and right now the story I'm telling picks up right after Empire Strikes Back, and it tells the story of the year or so between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. So I'm telling the story of how Luke Skywalker goes from being that kind of like sad sack with only one hand. What a joker! And but then in Return of the Jedi, he's obviously like super cool. He's got the black outfit, and he's got another hand, and so on and so forth. And so making the choices for him of how he goes from there to there has been fascinating. And he loses his lightsaber, obviously, so he has to get a green saber and do all these different things. And it's been really fun to dig into that and just get to make all those choices. It's a blast. So is there anything you'd like to see in any of those characters do? Leia, Lando? I can do it.
Listen,
is what I'm saying.
I made a huge error of judgment, really. I did Worldcon. Does anyone ever go to Worldcon? Well, Worldcon was in Dublin, and they asked me to do the closing speech after George or Martin spoke, and I decided the best thing to do would be on purpose confuse Star Trek and Star Wars, and surely the fan
will get that joke.
The fan, it totally died. I actually never had felt an audience turn. So they were laughing, and then it just went. Whoom. And it was like the wrong room, and also I messed up a Doctor Who story. I was asked to do a Doctor Who book, and I thought, wouldn't it be a fun exercise to do a Doctor Who book, having never seen an episode of Doctor Who. So literally from walking past the television on my way to the kitchen, that was the only knowledge I had of Doctor Who. And I said, I'll write it, but they're never going to publish it. But they did publish it, and it was not well received. And rightly so. And that was the only time I regretted that, because I should have put the work in to research it. And I didn't. I just thought it'd be a laugh. And my friend gave me the best review ever, which was it was devastating, but lovely. And because he's such a kind guy. And he said, that Doctor Who book you wrote? And I said, yeah. He said, that was the best Star Trek book I ever read. And I said, I see what you're doing. Nice. So he was telling me it was exciting, but I didn't know anything about my characters. So fair enough, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, Star Wars takes itself very, very seriously, which is good. There's a whole story group at Lucasfilm that makes sure that all the details are gotten right and so on and so forth. But I as I said, it's one of my favorite fictional universes, so I feel like I have a PhD in it, so I'm able to sort of dig into all those things and so on and so forth. But if it were Star Trek, I wouldn't take that job, because I don't have that innate sense of, well, this is the right way to do it or the wrong way to do it. And it's really complicated writing in those sprawling fictional fan bases that a lot of people really love or hate. It's not an easy job.
There's a lot of strong feelings, and I've heard some people really don't like Rogue One. For some reason, I watched that movie. I thought it was a great movie.
I did too. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah, but there's a lot of Star Wars people who don't like it, and a good friend of mine really doesn't like it because he said it's not a Star Wars movie. It's too violent, and I don't know. But anyway, I don't want to start that debate now. I can see people are twisting things now, and they like me on the way in. Now they're not so sure.
Mm-hmm. I guarantee that there are many strong opinions about Star Wars just in this room today, which is kind of cool, right? I think the last thing you want is a creator of content. God, listen to me. A storyteller. It's much more noble. Is people to be sort of apathetic about what you do, right? I would, it's a cliche, but I kind of would rather have people hate what I do than be apathetic toward it, because at least I've generated that reaction, and it means I did something, even if I did everything totally wrong. At least I did something. But
I think the only time in the history of the internet that everybody agreed was on the casting in Good Omens, because everybody said, you see, everybody looked at those two guys and said, yes, perfect. And I've never seen that before. So Neil Gaiman again.
It was strong. It was strong. I also think if we're going, Obi-Wan Kenobi as Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan Kenobi. Oh, yeah. I thought that was quite good too. So, but anyway, all right, we're good. All right. Thanks, guys, for listening.
There's a lady right at the back there. I can only see out of one eye, so I'm not sure.
I love all of your work.
Oh, thank you.
Every single thing. Like, it's perfect. But my favorite of all of your...
No, don't say any more. Good night, everyone. Thank you very much.
I'm fangirling really hard right now.
Okay.
My favorite of all of your standalone books is the wish list.
Yeah, thank you. It's funny that when that came out, it didn't make much of a splash, but it's one of those that just keeps coming back, and over the years, people really like it. And I think it's because it's got real heart, and that's because it's before I started getting super snarky like I am most of the time, because we just had a baby, so like for a very brief window, I was all about being a parent, and then my kids started to talk, and that that kind of wore off, but. But thank you. I love that book, and I think there'd be room for more of those. Actually, it's because of the system, the way it works out. Anyone can have a wish list. I know I didn't get your question. Sorry.
No, I was just going to ask, what is your favorite of all of your standalone books?
Oh, of my standalones, I really like Airman. Because I think it's the most complete. I was trying to do a classic story in that 19th century tradition of adventure story. The trope is you take someone who's super happy and has a lot of gifts, and you just rip all those away from them, and then watch him. It's quite cruel, and then let him build them back up again. So Airman, that would be my favorite. Thank you, and thanks again. That was lovely.
Hi.
Hi.
I really enjoyed the Daniel McAvoy books.
Okay, thank you.
With this being like another adult book, are there going to be more of that range?
Well, the Daniel McAvoy at the moment is being developed for TV, so hopefully that will.
Yay.
Yeah, so hopefully that will, and then it'll be amazing actually, because just about the time that the first series comes out, I will coincidentally have an amazing brainwave for a third book, which will be totally coincidental. And but I'm predicting that's what. No, I don't know. I'd like to do a third one, but again, when they come out, maybe a few thousand people bought them. They didn't make a huge splash, so you don't know if there's an appetite for them or not. But again, like Wishlist, they're still selling and still selling. So maybe I would do a third one. I loved writing those books. They're fun.
They were really fun.
Yeah, thank you. They're quiet tonight.
Oh, we covered everything, I suppose.
Oh, we have one more there. Oh, two more. And someone ran away. I don't know what's going on there.
Hi. So you talked about this a little bit already, but I was just doing one of my habitual Hitchhiker's Guide rereads and rereading it another thing, and just being amazed that you were able to do that and do this so well. And I know, Charles, with all your work on comics, just kind of the relentless, it's work on multiple series at a time. How do you deal with really, really intense pressure and just write and be creative through those conditions?
That's a great question, right? So when I was coming up, it's a little better now. Right now is a very intense time, but generally speaking, it's a little bit better now than it was. But when I was coming up in comics, I was working for both Marvel and DC at the same time, and they both kind of wanted me to sign an exclusive deal with one or the other. So they gave me a lot of books to write, and so I was writing. At 1.8 comic series per month, so that it's the whole frog in the pot of boiling water thing. You don't realize how bad it is until you're through it, and you're like, holy shit, like I almost died. But that's generating a comic book script every few days. You just have to, and then there's the edits and the press and the rewrites and all the stuff you have to do on them, and reviewing art and so on. And it was pretty brutal. Particularly because they weren't all the same story, right? I was bouncing around between all these different characters and all these different worlds, and I built up systems. I had notebooks. I had all these different things, but ultimately, I was so thrilled to be doing it that it wasn't hard to motivate, and I still had the energy and power and joy to be able to do it. I don't think I could do. I know I couldn't do it again. But when you're a little younger, you have a little more fire in your veins. You can do things that seem impossible now. But mostly it's just you work very, very hard to get to the point where Marvel DC are going to give you 8 series a month to write, and so then you don't want to screw any of it up. You don't want to lose any of it, so you just find it. You just find it somehow. But it is very hard. Yeah, like 1,000-yard stare thinking about those days. But it was good, you know.
It's tough going. I mean, but it's you really have to look at it as a job. There is the creative element, but there's also the job element. So you've got to sit, and that's most of it. You have the ideas quite quickly, but then you have to put them down in the best way you can. So I certainly agree with Charles. I couldn't work that much anymore. I've slowed down. Right, I used to do 2 books a year. Now I do 1 book every 18 months. So I've really slowed down. And even though my conditions are much better, I have a lovely little office now. I wrote the first 30 books in the baby's bedroom when the baby was not using the bedroom. So the baby had priority over that bedroom. So I associate creativity with the smell of Johnson's baby powder. And but you just go in there and you just know you have this chance and you got to take this chance. And if you don't deliver, you're going to lose that chance. Now both of us maybe have a bit more of a buffer against that, but as well when you're young and you're writing comics for Marvel and DC, is there anything better than that? I don't think so. So you're doing what you love, and that's what keeps you going.
Which one?
Okay, my question to you is was there any, did it have to be a dragon, or could it have been any other mythical creature?
I wanted to do a dragon book, and I think that was the strongest. I wanted to pick the real, whatever the strongest stereotype in people's minds was regarding mythical creatures, and that was dragon. Like, if you asked anyone what's your favorite mythical creature, 5 out of 10, 6 out of 10 would say dragon. And I wanted to take that trope and turn it on its head. Like, if I'd picked Yeti or Bigfoot,
I was just going to say Bigfoot.
Some
Absolutely.
people wouldn't know as much about that, you know. But thanks to George Martin and Lord of the Rings, people have a very clear idea now what a mythological dragon is supposed to be in fiction. So I wanted to try and present a different angle on that. So for me, dragon was the only way to go. Thanks. We have 2 more, I think.
Sorry, another question. I read your list of favorite books, I think on The Guardian or something recently, and you talked about how you like The Talented Mr. Ripley. You really like anti-heroes.
Yeah.
Why is that?
I think they're more interesting. I think they're more true to life. I mean, I think we're all anti-heroes to some extent, usually not homicidal. But when I was growing up, the books that we were given, the heroes were all very lantern-jawed. I mean, I loved fantasy books, but it was kind of, you knew there was like the young, handsome kid who worked in a village, possibly in a stable, always had a feeling, I don't belong here. What is this strange birthmark in the shape of a dragon on my arse? What's going on there? And then suddenly, old man, grey beard, you come with me. Yeah, fuck my family, I'm out of here. Oh, mountain, put birthmark in hole on mountain, it opens. And I just couldn't, I loved it and it was interesting, but it wasn't until I read Huckleberry Finn that I thought, now, first person narrative, very fallible kid, cussed all the time, smoked a pipe, didn't like to wear shoes, didn't like to go to school, best friend was a slave, all totally cool. Revolutionary, I found out later, I didn't know at the time. And it was for the first time I thought, if I was on the Mississippi, those guys would let me hang out. Because I'm not perfect, they're not perfect, let's get on that raft. And that's how I like to present characters who are not perfect, but who ultimately will kind of, in Artemis's case, in 8 books' time, because I was making a lot of money, so I didn't want him to get good too quickly, will come around and do things the right way. And also, if we're honest, if you're watching Silence of the Lambs, you know, who are you watching? You're watching Hannibal. That's the character. And I wanted to see, can you take Hannibal and make him the lead? Now, often that doesn't work because they tried to do it with Hannibal in the movies, and it didn't really work that well. And they tried to do it with Jack Sparrow. Didn't really work. So it's kind of a hard thing to do. But for me, if I'm reading Treasure Island, who do I want to read about? Long John Silver. If I'm reading Peter Pan, I want to read about Captain Hook. So I find them more realistic because we all have that little bit of darkness in us. Usually it's just a little bit and it doesn't hurt anybody. But these characters have a lot of it, I suppose. This lady right there. You put up your hand for her. That is a good friend.
Thank you. Your advice to microphone voice. Sorry. Your advice to young writers, I guess, working on novels. Do you suggest writing outlines for each chapter, or just kind of free writing and figuring it out along the way?
Yeah, I would imagine we'll have elements that'll be the same in terms of our answer and elements that'll be a little bit different. So, and all I can really speak to is how I do it. I think for young writers starting, I don't think you start with novels. I think you start with short pieces. I think that it's about figuring out a way to get your ideas down on paper, and I think you start as high level as you can. And so you're just like, well, what is this story? What am I talking about? And I give the same advice to people who are starting out writing comics. And instead of trying to write a 75-issue masterpiece, you write a one-page story about someone asking someone out on a date. You write a one-page story about it's raining. You write a one-page story about two people getting in a fight. And that gives you the tools to then use those and integrate those tools into a larger narrative when the time comes. And when it comes time to do that bigger narrative, just as I do it, it's generally, I use these, every book I have a specific notebook for it. And the start of the notebook is, what is this about? What are the themes? What am I actually trying to say? Why am I writing this book? Why do I care about it? Why is this what I want to spend a year on? And then I start thinking about characters, and I say, well, who are the people that I want to express these ideas through? And then I start thinking about, what are the ways that I could tell that story? And somewhere in there, I have generally the hook of it. Like what is, like the Oracle Year. My first book is about a guy who knows 108 things that are going to happen in the next year and what he does with them and how they change the world. My second book, Anyone, is about technology that's invented that lets you put your mind in anyone else's body. So there's always like a central little thing, but then you start figuring out how you're going to explore that idea, and you don't drill down too fast. You have to let your mind work on it and let it gel. And if you're really just starting out, like, don't write a novel first, because it's write small, like get your arms around it, hone your talent. So that's how I would answer that question.
I would totally agree with not doing a novel first. You can do hundreds of little stories. How I would write a novel now is I would have a very basic idea, and then I would say, well, let me just write a couple of pages of that up and see if it's exciting to me. So I would write 5 or 6 pages, and if I feel the idea has legs, then I stop and I go away and write a plan. And my plan would be about 4 pages, and once I have that, then I just go. And one thing I have started to do in the last 5 books is not to write in a linear fashion. So if I have an idea for a scene at the end, I used to wait until I got to that scene before I would write that. But I find that now that sometimes I've thought about it so much, by the time I get to it, it's a little bit stale. So I find it works for me. If you have an idea for a scene in your book, just write that scene. You can fit it in later.
Something you just said is really resonated strongly, is that you have to be careful not to let the book get stale, because you're going to live with it for a long time. And there's all these weird tricks, and I think every writer is different about how they prevent that from happening and how they keep it staying fresh. I try to let the book surprise me as I'm writing it, so I don't have every last detail worked out. So there's still things that characters can do that I wasn't expecting, but it's kind of a challenge, because there's that 2/3 mark that I hit it too. Every writer, every novelist hits it when you're just like, why do I even give a shit about this? Like, I'm gonna throw it away, and because there's another cool idea I could work on instead. But you have to push through, and you have to make it. You have to get to the point. And usually by the end of that, you're like, okay, this was pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just finishing is the main. You just need to finish that first draft. A lot of people, just what you said there, a lot of people about 2/3 through have another idea and think, oh, that's much better. I'm going to do that now. And then the same thing happens with that idea. So there's an awful lot of people who have like half a book in their drawer or 7 half books on their computer. So
no one will buy half a book. No one will buy half a story. No one will buy an idea, right? I mean, maybe, but generally speaking, no one will. That people will buy finished things. So, and even the act of finishing it, like I'm sure you have early books in your drawer. I do too, like stuff that is never going to see the light of day, but they're finished books, and they help. Every word you write, every story you tell is making the next story you tell better. So you finish them. Because otherwise, like, you're not learning how to finish a book, you're learning how to write half a book, and nobody wants to buy half a book.
That is wise wisdom. I expect no less from a Star Wars expert.
Yes.
Wise wisdom it is.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That's such a good sentence from me.
So this is going to be our last question, just so we can start the signing. And there's only one. This worked out.
No crash. All right, so you have a lot of fictional universes that I think are really fun, and could kind of maybe coexist. So I was wondering if there's any because I thought of Highfire and the world of Artemis Fowl as sort of seeming like they could coexist. Are there any? Did you also agree, or do you find that with other aspects of your stories that there might sort of be characters or universes that could go together?
There are some characters that go together. And the one that is threaded through a lot is this guy called Ishi Maishi, who was a Japanese munitions expert. And he's in the wish list. He's in the Fowl Twins. He's mentioned in the Artemis books. I think he might be in the Supernaturalist. So he's only a minor character, but I just placed him in all of these books. So I think it is all one universe in different times, because creating many universes is a lot of work. So it's all one vast universe. So that's. And I'm always waiting for people to spot stuff and that they never do, that I think's hilarious. In my mind, I have this vision that these dads are being forced to read my books to their kids, and the dads really don't want to do this, which I think is funny. So it's their turn to do story night, so they trudge up to the bedroom and they're having to read 2 chapters of this leprechaun bullshit to their kids. So I like to put in little jokes for the dads that will hopefully make them laugh, that are totally inappropriate for the kids, and then they have to explain something to the kids maybe 4 years ahead of their proper time for the kid to hear that. And my favorite one is there's a dwarf in the last Guardian Artemis Fowl book, and his name is Colin, which is fine. Okay, so Colin the dwarf. But what you don't know is that his second name is Oscopy. Okay, so if you... and the dad doesn't know that, so he's reading about Colin. He's thinking, oh, Colin Dwarf, how cute. And then he comes up on the next page in the sentence, and then out of the deep, because dwarf's tunnel, right? So out of the deep, dark, smelly hole came colonoscopy. And suddenly he's read it out before, and he starts laughing. And one dad told me, so this actually worked. The dad told me, the kid said to him, what's funny about colonoscopy, Dad? And the dad said, which I thought was brilliant, he said, son, there's nothing funny about colonoscopy. So that's what you get up to in an office on your own.
Sniffing that baby powder, huh?
Sniffing that baby powder.
Okay.
And that's how we end.
Thank you, guys.
Yep. Thanks very much.